This is not the kind of bliss that we're talking about today, but having just gone to the Tori Amos concert a couple days ago, kind of wish that it was. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our new introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it gives you a pretty good summary of what the horror movie syllabus is all about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our Is It Syllabus-Worthy series, where we look at movies that you guys have recommended to me in the comments. Movies that I've never seen before, and I watch them, and then I let you know what I think. Was it good? Was it bad? And ultimately, is it syllabus worthy? And if you haven't seen the thumbnail or seen the title, the movie we're looking at today is a movie called Bliss. Now, Bliss is a movie that was recommended by L.S. Gregor, known to his friends as Lee, and Lee recommended this one in our vampire subgenre video, which gives me a big clue right off the bat that it's a vampire movie, and you guys know me. I love me some vampires, so already off the bat, I'm a little excited for this movie. And then Lee only described this movie as pretty bloody and tragic, which is A, nice and mysterious, didn't give anything away, B, really turns out it was a really good explanation of the movie. But other than that, all he told me was which movie he was looking for, the 2019 movie, rather than some of these other ones that are called Bliss, because there are a lot of movies called Bliss. So make sure you're watching the right one if you're trying to follow along at home. But that's all I had to go on, and I didn't look up anything else about the movie because I didn't want to be spoiled by it. But again, I love me a vampire movie, and just not for nothing, Lee has a track record of recommending movies that we wind up discussing on the syllabus as like doctor level selections or an extra credit or something like that. So Lee's recommendations tend to be really good. They tend to be syllabus worthy. So the expectations got a little high for this one. Now, did those expectations wind up hindering things? Did it wind up being a problem, or did it live up to those expectations? Well, why don't we find out right now? Like I said, the movie that we're talking about today is a movie called Bliss. Bliss came out in 2019 and was directed by a man named Joe Begos, and who I'm not really familiar with. Looks like he's done quite a bit of horror stuff in his filmography. The only movie I recognize was a movie called VFW, which we might wind up talking about in the syllabus in the future, possibly. But that's the only other one of his that I was familiar with. But he looks like he's somewhat prolific as a horror director, and this movie is apparently a little bit of a departure from what he has normally done, and I believe it. I believe it, because this movie is a trip, and that's putting it mildly. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young woman who is a painter, and she's got a mental block. She's not able to produce or finish her big piece that needs to be done for her upcoming show. And so, having been recently sober, she decides to go back into trying to do some drugs to get a little bit of inspiration and get the creative juices flowing. And she's given a drug called Bliss. And that drug is a very powerful hallucinogenic drug that sends her on a very wild trip of partying and craziness and a descent into madness, frankly, that may or may not be leading her into some vampiric type activities. But we'll stop there so as not spoil the movie in case you haven't seen it. But if you haven't seen it, I mean, I don't know. Should I tell you to go see it? Because it's a wild trip of a movie, man. And I guess that's what we're about here to talk about, because this movie is visually stunning. It is an absolutely gorgeous movie in a very grimy and dirty way. Like, what Begos has done is make you feel kind of like you're on Bliss, like you're hallucinating yourself. The camera work in this is very spinny, quite literally very spinny, and the aesthetic of the movie is very colorful and dark at the same time, and just kind of messy and trippy and cloudy and blurry, and it really kind of feels like you're tripping on this drug. You really feel like you're in the shoes of your protagonist. And it's interesting because he puts out all these scenarios that are simultaneously sexy and disgusting. There's a grossness to this movie, but there's also a sex appeal to it that it really rides this line very well. It's really hard to explain this, but you'll see things in this movie that are rousing, but also really off-putting at the same time. And it's hard to explain it. I guess you just kind of have to see it. But again, it's not going to be for everybody, because there's some really bizarre, strong imagery here going on that is I guess surreal would be a really good word for this. That it's shot in a very surreal way, and a lot of the stuff on screen is very, very surreal, and it works. It works because it kind of evokes the painting style of your protagonist. She's an artist, and she's painting stuff that is a little bit more abstract, not extremely abstract, but it ties in with the aesthetic of the film. I read a review of this after the fact, of course, that compared this movie to Gaspar Noé, and it's a very apt comparison. It very much feels like a Noé film, like Enter the Void or Climax or something like that. It really feels kind of like that. And apparently, Begos cites Noé as kind of an inspiration or kind of influence on him, and it shows. At least in this movie, it shows. It's very Noé-esque. So if you don't like Noé, you're not going to like this either. But if you do like him, I think you'll be on board for this, and I do. And so I was down with the aesthetic quite a bit. I was really up for the ride that it was going to take me on. This this trip that it was going to take me on, and I was really, really digging the aesthetic of the movie. The story is maybe a little bit rote, if I'm being honest. Aside from the drugs are bad, okay, kind of storyline there, it really doesn't have a lot of interesting surprises or twists or fresh takes on anything. In fact, the movie starts out very similar to the way Driller Killer starts out, with Abel Ferrara's movie. A struggling painter who's not getting the work done, and has his agent breathing down on him, needs to make the money. I mean, it's the same exact setup, and apparently Abel Ferrara is another influence of Joe Begos. So not a surprise there, but really felt, I mean, derivative, honestly, of Driller Killer. If I'm being honest with you, the way it starts. And it was a bad foot to start on, if I'm being honest. I was really not super engaged with this movie for a big chunk of it, and I'm going to explain a little bit more why in a second. But the fact that it was kind of aping Driller Killer's story and not telling me anything terribly fresh is a big part of that. But it really picks up more in the last act. In the last act, things get insane, and it saves the movie. It really saves the movie for me because, like I said, for the first two parts of this movie, I'm not really engaging with it. The first two acts, it's really not hitting for me. It's fine, but it's not, it's rote. It's not surprising. It's not super engaging except for the visuals. The visuals are what keep you going for the first part of this movie. And then when it goes bug nuts crazy towards the end, that's when the stuff is awesome. That's when the gore really kicks. There's a little bit of gore earlier on, but the gore gets really wild later on in this movie, and it needed it. It's like a fresh injection of life into this movie when that gore kicks in. It really energizes things, really got me back on board with this movie because I was looking at this and thinking, is this going to be the first movie that I just flat out now don't like that's recommended to me? No, it's not. That last act really saved it, man. It really worked because the first two acts struggle, again, partly because of a rote story, but partly because of the acting. And the acting in particular of the lead girl, who's Dora Madison Burge. And it's weird because I've seen her in other things. I've seen her, I guess she was in Friday Night Lights and in Dexter, and I've seen her in both of those, and she was fine in those. Particularly, not noteworthy good, but good, passable, fine. Here, I didn't like her, and I understand you're not supposed to like her. She is an angry person. She's got a lot of issues, and she's pushes people away. She's supposed to be unlikable. She's supposed to be abrasive, and she does it very well. But it's like one note. She plays this one note angry girl throughout the first two acts of the movie. There's really nothing to connect to. There's no softer side. There's nothing to make you sympathize with her. She's just like at 11 all the time. It's like, the thought I had was Nomi Malone from Showgirls, Elizabeth Berkley's character, just goes from zero to angry really, really fast. And I couldn't get that out of my head. And I was just like, what the hell is up with this performance? It's really not hitting the mark. And, not for nothing, but it's not like there's a lot of great acting going on in this either. Jeremy Gardner's in this as her friend, and he's solid. He's good in this. And it's interesting because he was in another movie that Lee recommended, actually, that wound up being one of our Doctor Level selections, After Midnight. And he's great in that, and he's good here. But he didn't have a whole lot to do. And the movie really hinges on Dora Madison's performance because she is the central focus, the central character. You're following her, you're with her the entire time. And I was really, really struggling to connect with her. I really didn't like her. And again, I know that's by design. I've read reviews and people think she really nailed that. She did. She did. She nailed it, but I wasn't liking her, and it was hard for me to get into this movie as a result because the movie itself, the story wasn't super captivating. She was kind of pushing me away, quite literally, like she pushes everybody else away in the movie. So I was just like not feeling this at all, and it was only the visuals that were keeping me involved. The only thing keeping me like engaged in the movie was the visuals. But I will give credit where it's due. Dora Madison's performance winds up being really good overall because she is not afraid to go there. This role is kind of a brave performance, really, because this role requires a lot of nudity and gore and just kind of unflattering looking shots of yourself. Like she doesn't look great in large parts of this movie. She really kind of has to leave herself all out there on screen, and it's kind of it's got to have been uncomfortable. It had to have been difficult, and she does it with gusto. She does not shy away from anything, and it's not just the nudity. It's I mean just like little things like her face and hair being messy and messed up, and like just being covered with gore and blood, and just being generally speaking not hot, not sexy, not pretty, just looking like a mess, looking ugly cry kind of face. Like she really gives that without any sense of you know too much pride or modesty or whatever. She just goes for it. So in that sense, I will tip my hat to her. It's a very solid performance from that sense. I just wish that there was a little bit more to latch onto early on. But I'll be honest, once that third act kicked in, I didn't care so much. I didn't care that most of the other supporting actors were either passable or actually not that great either. And George Wendt from Cheers, Norm from Cheers, shows up at one point inexplicably for no good reason. He's in this movie, doesn't really do anything. But it's weird. It's a weird movie overall, but it's weird how these actors are used or not used in some cases. But by the time that third act kicks in, when the action and the intensity gets ratcheted up to 11, and she goes off the rails, it's awesome. It's absolutely fantastic. It saves the movie for me. The last 35 minutes of this movie, I was so locked into it. I was so into it. And I think the ending is absolutely fantastic. I was super into this movie, and I was worried because like for the first almost 45 minutes to 50 minutes or so, I was really struggling with this one. It felt like wannabe Gaspar Noé. It felt like wannabe Abel Ferrara, and I'm like, I can just go watch those movies instead. But it pulled it out. It pulled it out, and it wound up being totally worth my time. And by the end of the movie, I was extremely glad I had watched it. But does that make it good enough to be on the syllabus? Let's find out. So it's time to ask, is it syllabus worthy? And the answer is probably not. That last act kicks ass. It's so good, but it's just probably not enough to make up for the first two acts of the movie. This is a back heavy movie. It pays off, but it takes a while to get there, and you got to be patient with it. Again, you can just revel in the trippy visuals, and that's honestly it was enough to get me through it. I didn't turn it off or anything like that. I mean, I wouldn't have anyways because I was watching it for the channel. But had I not been, I probably still wouldn't have turned it off because it was enough of a trippy experience with some really cool visuals, really great camera work, and just a really interesting look and aesthetic to the movie that I probably would have stuck with it anyways. And I would be glad that I did because it does pay off. But again, that payoff a little late and probably not enough to push out, definitely not enough to push out any of the vampire movies in that subgenre. I don't think this movie's making the cut in that by a long shot. There's just too many vampire movies that are just far superior that I love way too much more. But maybe in like surreal horror, you could maybe make an argument to put this near. It is a pretty surreal movie. You could make an argument for maybe at least an extra credit. Like, yeah, I could maybe see maybe putting this in extra credit, but maybe, or I read some reviews that we talked about the ambiguity of this movie and like how much of this movie is real and how much of this is like a hallucination in our lead protagonist's head, like an unreliable narrator thing. And that's interesting because I didn't really take it that way when I was watching it. There are some hallucination type stuff that happens in the movie, some hallucinatory scenes, but I never really got the impression that we weren't actually seeing reality. I think it's pretty clear that it actually happened, but I guess there is an argument to be made that it is kind of an ambiguous movie. And so could it fit into the ambiguous subgenre? Maybe. Again, I didn't really think so. I probably wouldn't make the case for it there, but I guess one could make the case. So there are some other subgenres that you could maybe squeak it in here. I'd say it probably wouldn't fight its way through for me, but Probably not, but it's not a definite no, but it's not. It's definitely not. It's definitely not a yes. It's definitely not a yes. I really thought that this movie was going to be a big nope for me. I was really thought I was going to be negative on it until I got to the third act. And so while the third act did save this movie big time, not big time enough for it to push it onto my syllabus personally. Your mileage may vary. But I want to thank Lee for recommending this one because I'm really glad I did watch it. It did pay off in the end. Lee, your streak remains intact. I'm still enjoying everything that you've recommended. And if you haven't seen it, yeah, I'd say check it out. Like I said, it's not going to be for everybody. If you don't like Gaspar Noé type stuff, if you don't like Evil Ferrara stuff, you don't like overloading visuals for your senses, maybe bag off of this one a little bit. But for the rest of you who like gore and trippy stuff and like just really weird, kind of sexy and gross and mind-bogglingly strange narratives, go for it, man. Check it out. Let me know what you think. And now it's time for me to think about the answer to this trivia pursuit question. I've got my card here. As you know, I like to answer a question live on camera without cutting. And in this case, I think we're going to go with the monster category because, this is, kind of a vampire movie. And the question is this. In 1922's Nosferatu, what is the name of the sinister vampire of the film? And yes, I love me some Nosferatu. In fact, I think it's right there. I know the answer to this question. I know this one. Most horror fans who appreciate old horror or just film aficionados, film students in general should know the answer to this one. It's not Dracula. I'm going to give you that clue right off the bat because, Nosferatu is basically kind of a ripoff of Dracula. They didn't really have the rights to the book, so they couldn't use the name. So the character is not Dracula. It's named something else. And I'm going to give you a minute to think about it while I prattle, as I tend to do, because I know the answer. And I was, want to give you guys a chance to think about it. But if you haven't seen Nosferatu, though, really check it out. It's a silent film. It's a German expressionist horror film, and it can be a challenge for modern audiences because of that. But it is a really, really good movie. Just looks great, and it really kind of sets up so much of the iconography that you understand from vampire movies now. And I guess I probably shouldn't go into it too much because, spoiler alert, we're probably going to wind up talking about this one in depth in the future on the horror movie syllabus anyways, because as you know, with our new horror movie supplement, we are going to be talking about some movies that predate 1970. It's wild. It's crazy. It's exciting stuff. So stay tuned for that. But now it's time for you to lock in your answer because I've definitely prattled on long enough. My answer, of course, is Count Orlok, and we're going to check the card. Count Orlok it is. That is the name of Max Schreck's character, Max Schreck being the actor that played the Nosferatu, and he is downright unsettling. You should definitely check it out. Did you get Count Orlok? Did you know it? I told you not to guess Dracula, so if you guessed that, shame on you. But if you had a wrong guess, let us know what it was in the comments below so we can commiserate with your wrong answer. But thank you very much for hanging out. Thank you very much to Lee for this recommendation. And thank you to the rest of you for giving me recommendations. I got a nice long list to go through, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't make additional ones. Keep them recommendations coming because I'm having a blast and so far have not had one that missed the mark yet. Until next week when we talk about something completely different, class dismissed.